BYU faculty to do this. I would like someone to go through and show exactly what would be entailed in trying to produce plates of the kind Joseph Smith claimed to have. Because there are some people, Dan Vogel in particular, who toss off this idea very lightly that, well, maybe Joseph just made some plates to fool the simpletons around him. All right, I couldn't do that. I mean, my plates would look really bad. They wouldn't convince anybody they were of ancient workmanship and all that sort of thing. But what would it take, and how much gold would it take? Because these people knew gold. There were gold coins in circulation. They knew what it looked like. You didn't just spray paint them in those days. That wouldn't convince anybody even now. So what would it take to make them? How much gold would it take? And what would, you know, why didn't anybody in the neighborhood of Palmyra report that Joseph had this kind of specialty metal foundry on the southern edge of the city with the smoke belching out and people bringing gold ingots in the wheelbarrow and all that sort of thing? Because it wasn't there. Joseph didn't have the skill to do it. There actually, Richard Anderson has told me he thinks that that there was actually an attempt to portray Oliver Cowdery as a blacksmith at one point, because they knew somebody had to have the expertise to do it. But if you know anything about Oliver Cowdery, have you ever read Longfellow's poem about the blacksmith, the sinewy muscles and all that sort of thing? This was not Oliver Cowdery, who died very, very young of tuberculosis or something like that. He was a very, very frail person. So as soon as they saw him or realized what he was like, they gave up on that one. But there was a trial balloon to have Oliver Cowdery be the muscular blacksmith who created the plates. Because Joseph clearly wasn't. So, yeah, I should defer on that to someone who actually knows. Brother Sorens, would you like to answer that question? No. well, okay, well, let me just say that the consensus of serious scholars of Book of Mormon geography, of whom there aren't that many, but the consensus there is that the story of the Book of Mormon predominantly takes place in, first of all, a very limited area. That's important. If you put all of the distances together in the Book of Mormon, they're very, very small. You're not talking about, from Patagonia to the Aleutian Islands. That simply isn't the case. It also seems to be a warm area. There are a lot of reasons that most people tend to put it in Mesoamerica. That is, in roughly the area of southern Mexico, Guatemala, in that area. And where was the last battle? You don't have to believe any of this to be saved, but I think that the last battle was probably also down in Mesoamerica, and that Moroni has a long time after that final battle to wander. The final battle is in the 380s. Moroni buries the plates up in 421, so he's got a long time and good reason to leave the area. He's the son of the supreme commander of the Nephites. The Lamanites are looking for him. He's got the records, which they'd love to get and destroy, and presumably he's under divine guidance as well. And so, he moved as far and as fast as he could out of that area to get away from it, and then was probably taken to the place where the plates had to be. And then the Smith family, through a whole series of economic disasters and so on, was quote, encouraged, end quote, to eventually settle in the area they really needed to be, where the plates were. But I would put the battle and everything else down further south. But, as I say, people can differ on that. Book of Mormon geography is a really interesting topic, I think really important, but it's not essential to your salvation.
Would you mind, we've always used this 75 days as a translation time, but it seemed like it actually started a year before, if I'm getting the dates right. Could not have been an adequate time, not for most of us, but for a very talented individual. How solid is that 75 days? It's 60 to 75 working days of translation, but they're scattered out over a little bit of a period, because Joseph, had to move around and there were interruptions. He lost his scribe, he lost the manuscript. There are a lot of things like that. But those days are pretty well established now. There was an article done a number of years ago published as a Farms paper, and now there's been a much more sophisticated treatment of the subject published in a book that I highly recommend called Opening the Heavens by Jack Welch and I can't remember who the co-editor was. But one of the articles in that is an article about the translation period of the Book of Mormon, where they pretty meticulously go through the historical data and reconstruct the translation time, which turns out to be very, very short. But yeah, it was spread over a little longer time than 2 months, but it was just over 2 months of actual working days.
And so that's partly what I'm addressing when I say it doesn't seem to me he comes in with a text that he knows or that that he's reading off of. If you could say, well, he had a year to do it, so he produced the text and then read from it, but he doesn't seem to be. So it seems to me he's either memorized it, and I can't memorize 5,000 words a day. I just can't. And I've got a reasonably good memory, but I couldn't do that. I'm positive, not day after day for that long. And it's pretty clearly he doesn't have a text with him, and he's not. I don't think he's making it up on the fly either, because I don't believe that's humanly possible. That's even less plausible to me than memorizing it and dictating it. So, yeah.
It seems that he didn't even have a Bible nearby,
right.
And yet we have 435 or whatever verses from Isaiah.
Yeah.
How do you harmonize that?
The Isaiah problem people have talked about in the Book of Mormon, I sometimes think we ought to view it differently. It ought to be the Isaiah miracle. I mean, if it's really true that he doesn't have a Bible in the room with him, we know that at a certain point he goes out and he has Oliver Cowdery buy a Bible. He didn't have one. Nowadays we all have, probably lots of us have lots of Bibles. I have so many Bibles, different translations, different languages and things like that. But most of us will have several. And there'll be a whole bunch around the house. They're cheap, they're easy to get. In those days they weren't so cheap, and for a fairly poor family they would have you always hear the phrase, a family Bible. That's because not every individual had one. When Joseph moves away from his parents' home, the evidence seems to indicate he didn't have one. And so for people who say that he was this great student of the Bible, who's working in it every day, he probably didn't even own a copy. And then he goes out at a certain point and has Oliver buy one for him. But the fact that the Isaiah chapters show up in the Book of Mormon in the form they do, some people see it as a challenge. They're so similar to the King James. I say, no, it's kind of amazing. If he really didn't have a text with him, then it's astonishing that he was able to do that. How did he do that? That becomes a challenge for the critics to explain, not for us to explain. Now, there are differences between the King James text and the Book of Mormon text. Some of them are quite interesting, but there's still a debate going on about that. But if, as seems clear, he didn't have a book with him, he didn't own a Bible, and he didn't have any text with him, then how he came up with that is really mind-boggling, and would be very, very difficult to account.